Welcome, viewers. My name is Zeki Abdelhamid. I am a faculty member at Edmonds Community College and a program director at Humanities, Washington. Many of you are familiar with our ongoing series, Conversations in the Humanities, which is a partnership between Humanities, Washington and Edmonds Community College. We look forward to welcoming scholar David Fenner to our campus on April 7th, 2015 at 7 p.m. at our Blackbox Theater, where Mr. Fenner will present Islam 101, Perceptions, Misconceptions, and Context for the 21st Century. This conversation is, as always, free and open to the public. I am joined today in the studio by Mr. Fenner. Mr. Fenner is a speaker for Humanities Washington's Speakers Bureau. He is retired from the University of Washington in 2007 as the Assistant Vice Provost for International Education, following a successful career that included establishing exchange programs in universities in Egypt, Morocco, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and Pakistan. Today we hope to give you a brief preview of Mr. Fenner's talk in April. David, welcome.
Thank you, Zaki. Nice to be here.
Absolutely, nice to have you. So, to start things off, could you give us a little bit of a background about yourself and especially how you got interested in this topic and the time that you've spent living in Muslim countries?
Yes, I sure could. I've been very fortunate to have had opportunities in Yugoslavia, the then Yugoslavia, as an undergraduate, where I spent a month in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then after that, I was studying in the Soviet Union and had a chance to spend considerable time in Uzbekistan, mostly in Tashkent, one of Seattle's sister cities. And following a career as an academic, I moved to the Middle East with my wife. We joined the Peace Corps together and were posted, again, luckily, to a country called Oman on the Arabian Peninsula, borders Saudi and Yemen and the Emirates, and it is a remarkable country in many ways. We spent 2 years there as Peace Corps volunteers, teaching. In the mornings we taught school, and in the afternoons, because it was too hot for the kids to go to school there, we worked on a malaria control project for the World Health Organization. One of the great things about that job was that our mission was to interview everyone in the village we lived in, of about 10,000 people, and to determine the incidence of malaria in each of the different neighborhoods. And that gave us a wonderful set of contacts, not only with the kids in the village, but also with their families of all generations. After 2 years, we were lent to the United Nations Development Program in the central desert of Oman and spent a little more than a year traveling with a Bedouin tribe, immunizing their kids against childhood diseases, and living with a nomadic people, one of the last nomadic peoples in Arabia. That was just a remarkable experience for a young man from the Pacific Northwest who hadn't had even dreamt of that kind of an opportunity. Then at the University of Washington, as you mentioned, I traveled around the world and was able to link the UW up to universities in a wide range of countries, and all the ones you mentioned, with particular emphasis probably on Egypt and Cairo, where I spent considerable time putting a link together between the American University of Cairo and the UW.
That's fantastic. So your interest in Islam, it started out when you were in Oman and then carried through. Why did you feel the need to take that topic and share what you learned about it with folks? What drew you to Islam?
The intensity of the experience, I think, Zaki. The chief impression you get when you live in the Middle East, as many people have recognized, is that Islam is a all-encompassing way of life, not just a religion. It is a cultural set of guidelines. It is a social fabric. It is a political organizing principle. It's just so much life, all under the rubric of Islam, that when I got back to the United States in 2010, I I think I was troubled by this maybe superficiality of the impressions of the Middle East and of Islam, knowing how many layers of depth there were to it, cultural, social, political, but also importantly historical layers. And it's that hopefully deeper understanding of what makes the Muslim world unique. And by Muslim world, I mean people in Europe, people in the Middle East. There are nearly 4 million Muslims in North America. The largest group of immigrants and refugees in Washington state is from Hispanic countries, but the second largest group comes from Muslim majority countries. So the Muslim world is here as well as there. And my hope is that through the wonderful vehicle that Humanities Washington and Edmonds Community College provide is to be able to share all kinds of information about the diversity and depth of Islam, both here and abroad.
That's great. And you want this to be a conversation because you mentioned safe zones. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. There seems to be an awful lot of talking and labeling and even judgmental conclusion drawing about the Middle East today, and particularly about Islam. And my hope is that what we can have instead is a discussion, not necessarily label things good or bad, good or evil, right or wrong, but to understand just with more information and more insight and maybe the benefits of my own background and very lucky experiences, start to share with people greater information which will lead to more connection to the people of the Middle East and the Islamic world, rather than just sort of thinking of them as us and the other.
Right. So let me give you a couple of statistics here, and I want to get your take on them.
Yeah.
So according to a recent survey conducted by Zogby Analytics, favorability towards Muslim Americans was just 27%, which is a drop from 36% in 2010. So that's a sizable drop in just 4 years. So it's at 27% currently. Why do you think, what contributes to this decline in favorability?
I'm afraid much of it is the headline news. We hear, news tends to be negative anyway. You hear about the fire or the robbery or the traffic jam. You don't hear about the neighborly communication that someone has when he brings a flower to the next door neighbor lady. So news tends to be negative anyway. The news from the Middle East is highlighted by a series of horrendous events that have occurred over the last several years. And I'm afraid that what's happening as a result is that a whole religion, the religion of nearly 1/4 of the world's population, is now being equated with wrong, bad, evil, violent, destructive, and somehow against all of our value systems. And I think that's an incorrect conclusion to draw, and much too facile a way to look at the events and the peoples and the societies and the values of the Middle East. But I'm afraid, in answer to your question, that the favorability rating, which is sort of an odd question to ask anyway about a religion, but I can understand why they did it, and the troubling aspect of it is that as that number goes down, as I unfortunately saw in Yugoslavia with the Bosnians and their relationship to the Croatians and the Serbians, as that number goes down in favorability, the number of intolerant acts, of hate crimes, of discrimination against that group goes up. And there is absolutely, should be no space for that in our state, in our nation. We are a nation of immigrants, a state of immigrants. We need to develop, obviously, a tolerance, a peaceful coexistence, a modus vivendi with all the people, whether they're the same as we are or different from us.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the headlines in the news lately. ISIS and Boko Haram and some of these groups that are coming on the scene and committing heinous acts, whether it's beheading people on camera and so forth. So how do you reconcile what you talk about as the peaceful aspects of Islam with what these groups are doing?
There is no scripture that I'm familiar with that doesn't have parts of it that you could extract to support any activity in the human range of endeavors. And that could be from violent acts to peaceful communication. And there is good scriptural foundation for any of that. With Boko Haram and ISIS, I think that many people have said there is an extremist wing of Muslims that have decided that they can support, reinforce their own actions with the very protective quotes from the Hadith, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, or the Quran, but by at the same time ignoring many of the other aspects and tenets of Islam that are the exact opposite. This isn't unique, however, to Islam. We certainly have an expression in English that you can quote scripture to support anything you want to do. In the Hebrew Bible, there are absolute contradictions about peaceful coexistence and violence. In the New Testament, there are the same, and in the Quran and Hadith, there are the same. So I think what we tend to forget, however, is that an extremist wing of any of those religions is not a good model to characterize the whole of the religion. ISIS is doing terrible things, but they're doing terrible things mostly to other Muslims. And then to be able to put a label on that and say, this is bad because it's Islam, is again too simple and an incorrect, I think, interpretation of what's going on.
Do you think that poverty in some of these countries and the lack of social justice contributes to that extremism?
Oh, absolutely. There is, I think, no question that any time a group is living with no hope, with no outlet, with no exit, as Jean-Paul Sartre used to say about hell, that there is no way out of their present condition. They may have heard from the colonial power, from the authoritarian regime, from a proselytizing religious figure, that those groups have the hope for moving up out of the very dire conditions that many people live in, particularly in poor countries. And there isn't any doubt that all of those, that hopelessness in particular, can lead to an extreme set of actions, an extreme set of beliefs, and also a susceptibility to that kind of message that we will provide you with paradise, with an outlet, with a hope that you haven't had before. And so I think there is a definite link, and maybe even a linear one, between the conditions that people live in, the voice that they have, the political participation they have, and their extremism in many countries.
That is terrific. You know, I could go on and ask a lot of questions. There's questions about Sharia and about jihad and all of that stuff, but I think we will save that to the actual event. I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation, and I really look forward to it. So on April 7th at the Blackbox Theater at 7 p.m., Mr. David Fenner will be here to answer all your questions about Islam, and should be a fantastic conversation. David, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in a few months.
Thank you, Zaki. Look forward to April 7th.
Thank you.
Thanks.